All right. Well, welcome to the franklinpodcast.com. And I have two of my new friends. Ryan, you're kind of a friend from the past, but you're really more of a new friend now. And so Ryan, he treated me to something just totally out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it. He said, Craig, when Ryan reached out on to me on LinkedIn, he said, "Are you the Craig Stevens from so and so?" I said, "Yeah, I think that's me." And he says, "Yeah, well, we met before, and let's go fishing or something like that." Anyway, it turned into a fishing trip. And then Ryan set this thing up, and this is the first time I've ever went trout fishing and actually had someone tell me what to do and show me what to do. So Ryan, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and introduce David, but first go in and explain a little bit how we got to David in the first place.
Yeah, well, I think it's fair to start off with the two biggest fish of the boat that day happened to come from Craig, the guy that never fished before. So that was definitely fun. But no, my name is Ryan Schaefer. I'm in software sales, and I was looking through current clients in Tennessee, and I realized that Craig and his team in a former life had referred Ceridian, or my company, the software company rather, this particular company to go through an HCM evaluation. So part of that, part of my job is to network with potential partners and influencers of deals. So I had reached out just like anybody would typically reach out to go golfing. I'm not into golfing, I'm in the fly fishing. So I reached out to Craig and said, "Hey, would you be open to the idea of going out on a float trip for half a day?" So essentially from there, then I was scrambling. After he said yes, I was scrambling to find a guide in the Nashville area or Middle Tennessee that was credible to go fly fishing on a river, personally that I've never been on. And so just by dumb luck, I ended up finding David, and kind of the rest is history from that day.
And I got to explain a little bit about the river too, because I think Ryan, you said, is there a place go fishing near you or something
That's
like that?
right.
I said,
That's
you know
right.
what? All my life I passed over the Caney Fork River, and when I was real young, we had a farm on the Caney Fork River above the dam. But all my life, my dad would say Caney Fork River every time we passed it on the interstate. And so when I said, well, I know there's trout in the Caney Fork River, I was actually down there once or twice trying to figure out how to fish for trout, but I never really knew what I was doing. And I told Ryan, I said, well, I can dust off my 1930s fly rod. And he says, you don't have to worry about that because this guy's got it all. So I'm going to give it back to you, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. I ended up Googling Caney Fork River trout guide and then got connected with David. So, and I think David, by dumb luck, I threw out a couple dates and one of them happened to work for you, right? Because I know that you're pretty much booked through the summer at this point.
Yeah, I think I'm booked till the end of June, early July, and I think I just had a couple dates, and one of them just happened to be one you could do, so it worked out pretty well.
It's really cool. And I was real excited because David is from my stomping grounds. I went to high school in Cumberland County, went to Cumberland County High School. So when I found out David was there, I immediately bonded to David. I thought he was a great guy. And then since I didn't know what I was doing, I think David spent half of his time untangling my hooks and things. So it was really good. He showed me what to do and told me what to do. And Ryan was very like a cheerleader back there. And so it was the whole time was just a real exciting trip for me.
Well, I mean, like selfishly, like any business person that wants to go golfing, they obviously have a passion for it, right? So my passion is fly fishing. So when I can find somebody to go out on the water with me, it's a win number one. But then the second win is going with a guide. Two things happen. Number one, I really don't have to interact with the person I invited, right? I mean, obviously we build rapport and there's camaraderie that goes along with it. But for the most part, like the guide in this point, in this circumstance, David was really able to help you kind of navigate through the basics of fly fishing. And then from me, he was able to help me kind of fine tune some of my skills and give me some nuggets of information that I can go home with. And in the past, from doing this several times with various guides, over the states, or over a few different states rather, there's definitely a common theme. Like when it goes back to fishing, a lot of the times it goes back to the roots of their childhood, right? It's something that they did with their dad or their grandfather. So it starts to bring out just, like kind of that emotion from past relationships. But at the end of the day, it's also about getting into nature and getting away from the office and really kind of, just kind of exploring a new hobby in a new sport for a lot of people.
Very good. And David, I know we're not going to take all, I want you to walk us through your website here too. So do you have anything you'd like to start with, or you want me to just keep asking you questions?
I'll let you just keep going. And I don't have a whole lot yet, so I'm sure I'll come up with things as we go. But
All right, I'm gonna put the website in the background. I think we started there. So here we are. And so if they wanted to find you, they would go to this. Just kind of explain how to find you first, and we'll do that again at the end.
yeah, so troutzoneanglers.com is my website. Um, and that there's a kind of a long history there. I actually was a fly fishing blogger for many, many years, starting back in my college days and then going for a while. And my longtime blog was the Trout Zone. So it kind of became one of those things that when I started guiding, it was kind of a no-brainer because I had people that already knew who I was. So to find me, you can go to troutzoneanglers.com. If you're interested in fishing with me, you can email me at troutzoneanglers@gmail.com. Also, my phone number is on the website, and that's a cell phone, so you can text me or call me at that number.
That's very good. So I'm gonna just kind of take pictures of that day. And first off, it was one of those days where I kept saying, Ryan, I think it's going to be thunderstorms. And Ryan just says, "No, we don't worry about thunderstorms unless it's lightning. Then we'll worry about lightning." And then David and Ryan, they got all the equipment, and so they loaned me the equipment. We start off in this nice looking little float boat that David had, and you had a lot to say about different float boats. What makes this one special? You know,
So this particular boat, there's a lot of ways you can set up a boat, but this particular boat, and I guess style of boat is specifically laid out for fly fishing to make fly fishing work well. And you can throw spinning rods and stuff out of it as well, but really these boats come from a background built specifically for fly anglers and fly guides. So everything that's gone into this boat throughout the build process and everything is just with that in mind. It just makes it more comfortable. And also, you get two guys in a boat together waving fly rods around in the air, and that can lead to a lot of problems. But just the way these boats are laid out, it helps mostly minimize that. Obviously, you're going to have two guys waving those rods around together. At some point, you're going to get tangled probably, but you mostly can minimize it with a boat like this.
what you told me when I first got there, there's a little bit, I can't really see it very well probably from this picture, but there's a little bit of a little
A
harness.
casting brace.
Yeah. And then there's
Yeah,
another one I saw back here that Ryan had. I was hoping
right
that,
there where the Eddie 360 sign is the other casting
oh,
brace.
right here.
Yeah, that's the other brace. Yeah, so I think the best thing about those braces, other than safety, and obviously they're there more for safety than anything. These boats originally are designed for whitewater. They come from the Pacific Northwest originally and have kind of expanded it across the country, but um, they're designed for really heavy water. And so those casting braces, you can lock into that riding through a rapid, and you're safe. If you're not in that, a lot of boats you see out on the lake, whatever, nice bass boats, whatever, they're amazing boats. They cost a lot of money, but if it gets really rowdy, there's nothing to lock you onto that deck really. So it just the nice thing, other than the safety though, is it keeps the anglers where they're supposed to be. And that
Yeah.
kind of goes back towards that, keeping them separate so they're not getting in each other's way and tangling and all that. It just makes them know, hey, this is my spot. Hey, that's the other guy's spot, and keeps us both fishing the way we need to be.
And so when I first got there, he said, make sure I had a leg in there at all time.
Yep.
Now I know why, Ryan. I know why he said that. It wasn't because he's afraid of me falling out. It's to manage me and you. That's what it was all about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
big piece of it. I've had one person out of my boat, and pretty much every guide that I know of has a story of one person falling out. So it's not impossible. It's not something that you want to happen. So there's a little bit of safety there, but that management piece is really important as well.
Yeah, and I would say too, like unlike a canoe, I mean, these are really sturdy crafts. I mean, you can
Yeah.
stand up, you can move around in them. I mean, it's not. I mean, we at one point I think both of us were standing on one side, and it held its own.
Yeah.
Yep.
I didn't
Really
notice any
sturdy.
kind of wobbliness at all in the whole thing. And we were on real calm river, so we weren't on anything that was expecting to be shocking in any way. So it was very calm. All right. So the other thing that I noticed, that as long as we got the boat here, I noticed that you are actually rowing. And my first thought was, well, I think he can row down the river, but are we going to row back? Because that's going to be a little bit harder, especially if the water's flowing. And if water wasn't flowing, I guess you could have done it pretty easy. But you had another person pick up the boat at the downside, so that wasn't hard at all. That was just we had a what, 3/4 of a day? Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. And then I noticed that you have uh the different well, anyway, what I was going to say about the boat first was the other thing that helped me was you drew a line with the paddles and say, okay, Craig, you stay on that side and Ryan's going to stay on that side, and that will keep us from tangling. So I thought that was pretty smart.
That's one of those things you just kind of figure out real quick. If you didn't figure it out before guiding, you figure it out real quick after you start, or else you spend your whole life untangling everybody. Like I said, you can mostly minimize all that stuff. Even with somebody who's a beginner, you can really cut back on those tangles as long as you keep everybody where they're supposed to be.
And so one of the things that you guys are going to do, are you going to kind of advise me as a novice of how I can get started with equipment? So as you think of something, just let me know. I'm going to show other pictures as
Well,
we go.
a non 1930s fly rod would be a great start. So that would definitely be good.
I got the fly rod at a yard sale, and I thought, well, this is a fly rod, isn't it? I'm that dumb about fly fishing. So,
And
but
David,
now
I guess part of
no.
it though too is as you're going down the river on one of these drift boats, it's really the current that's taking you, and your job as the guide outside of from a rowing component is really just to slow down the boat enough where we can fish and get into the proper holes. Is that right? It's more just keeping the boat straight and slowing it down enough so we can fish the currents.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you had I took a picture up here. This will scare people because it got me and Ryan up close. But we started up at the base of the dam. And tell us a little bit about that, David. Just tell us a little bit about the reasoning for. I mean, that's where it was good place to start. But tell us the difference in the fish and the difference in the what to expect. For different times of day and that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of what determines kind of where we're floating is just the release schedule from that dam. And like all of the dams here in the Tennessee and Cumberland River valleys, the dam was created way back in the day to A, provide flood control, and B, to provide electricity, try to bring the South into the modern era, so to speak, help promote industry and everything with the electricity they could produce. So the release schedule from the dam really is everything. So I think the day we were fishing, if I remember right, they were releasing in the morning. We launched on higher flows, and then they cut the water off, and then we started drifting. And that was that was the main reason we started where we started. If the water had been low, we could have started a lot further down the river. But the best fishing usually, at least for numbers, is when the water's down. So we were just looking for that lower flow. That particular day, and that really varies from day to day. That's kind of one thing frustrating when you do fish the Caney. Ryan, when he first started talking to me about the trip, is like, so when do we meet? What do we do? And that's the first thing anybody asks me is like, when do we meet? Where do we meet? And I'm like, man, I'm sorry, I can't tell you until the day before, when they post that generation schedule. So we literally have, you know, the afternoon before to finalize, hey, let's do this, or where are we going to do this, or when are we going to do this? So
See how friendly Ryan is there? So that's
Yeah, actually, I think that was part of your suggestion as, oh, put your hand up and then it will automatically take a picture. So
yeah.
that's where
Well,
that came from.
that's your story. Yeah, my story is this is how friendly Ryan is. He was waving. All right, so up there, I don't have the picture of all the fish we took because how many we get? We finally decided that we didn't really count, but how many were there?
Yeah, we should have been counting because I typically do, but I mean, we were easily 40 to 50 fish for the day.
Yeah,
That was probably one of the smaller ones that we caught, but
I
Craig,
had
I
to get a
mean,
picture with
you,
Ryan with the smallest fish of the day.
I mean, you definitely had what I think two rainbows, one probably what close to 18, 20 inches. I mean, and the other probably shortly there after, right? I mean,
Yeah, well, it's
two really
probably
good sized
two or
fish.
something. Yeah, and that was really good. But see, I guess this is when the river already started. We started floating down, so the river drops pretty quick, right? At that point.
Yeah, you can actually see the wet line up the bank there, kind of where you're, yeah, right through there. It's probably down a foot and a half or two in that picture, it looks like.
But I noticed that you're always quick with the net too. And so the way you like to do it is you like to release the fish. Here's another one. But you like to release, and I know there's a bunch of good reasons to do that. Could you talk a little bit about that so that other people, if they're out fishing, they can know at least, you know, maybe what's best on the population of the fish?
Yeah, it's a kind of a philosophical choice that I've made, and the rest of my guides that I have at work with me, we've all kind of made that choice as a guide service that we operate on a catch and release basis, and there are several reasons. One really basic reason is just kind of self-preservation. If I put that fish back, I know I can go back next week and have another happy client catch it and get another big smile. If we harvest that fish, then that's the end of it. A lot of people think these are a limitless resource and that they're just constantly getting dumped in. They do stock a fair amount, but at the same time, if every single person that was out there fishing took home a limit every time, there would be very few fish left really, really fast. I think the other piece for me, though, there's that self-preservation piece, but there's also, I think, even more importantly, like that big fish that you caught, and we all enjoyed the experience of getting to see that really neat fish. Myself, the vast majority of my clientele as well would honestly rather catch a handful of really big fish than to catch 107-inch fish. And as again, people just assume these fish are just a dime a dozen. They're just everywhere. They aren't. A lot of these big fish are only here because they've grown up in the river, and they're never going to get big if we just harvest them every time we catch them. So I'm all about putting them back so they can get bigger and hopefully catch them as a monster a couple 3 years from now.
And this was kind of the typical of all day. We were on a fairly cold day for, spring, and it
Yep.
was raining. And it wasn't raining that much, but it was raining a little bit a few times through the day. And that's probably worked to our advantage because there was nobody out there except for one guy waved at us from the bank, and another guy was wading out further downstream. So that was an ideal situation. So if it looks like it's going to be a little rain and you got a couple of good buddies that have equipment, then I suggest that you go. But Ryan, you've probably done that a bunch of times.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of piggyback back on the conservation part of it, I mean, you know, I go fishing because I love it, number one. But number two is it's a way to get out of the house, right? It's a way to build camaraderie with other people. And I personally do not keep the fish for a lot of the same reasons that David said too. But I mean, there's just nothing more impactful than being able to go out, meet with some other people, have great conversations, and then catch a few fish along the way, right? It's less about stocking the freezer. And kind of David's point, it's like, yeah, there's stocking that happens, but keep in mind in Tennessee, a lot of these fish will die off as the water gets warmer. So I mean, we as conservationists and anglers have to give them the best opportunity to live as we can, right? Because we know that people are going to keep them. We know that some of the population is going to die off of warmer weather, and and I like to catch fish. It's there's nothing better than setting the hook on a fish and having that experience. And the more people that keep them, the less likely that's going to happen. And then ultimately what would happen is, they're just going to keep increasing the cost of our license, right? So there's a lot of factors that go into it, to make for a meaningful experience. And catching fish is certainly one of them. And I think it starts as our duty as anglers to practice appropriate means.
So I think that's really good. And that is typical of hunters and people who really grew up in the woods. They want to see the woods taken care of and the rivers taken care of. I grew up in the woods. I remember one time at the Caney Fork River, there were some people and they dropped their trash and they're about to kick it over the side of the cliff, and it made me vocal. So I said, man, I said, if you're too lazy to pick it up, let me do it for you. And there's a garbage can like 10 feet away, right? And so I went over, picked it up, threw it in the garbage can, and it's just crazy. I hate to see trash and things thrown around. But you're right. So here, what are you doing here, David? Looks like you're about to get a fish from.
Like we just netted one right there, and I can't tell if I'm about to unhook it or if we're just looking at the fish. I can't tell.
Yeah, I think we were in the transition of unhooking it, and I was probably saying, "No, Craig, put your phone away. We're not taking a picture of this one. This one's too small." And then you were probably getting ready to release it.
Well,
So
I was getting pictures of anything. They're probably hiding the evidence of the small fish. That's what it was. They're, Ryan was saying, "Why don't you take pictures of the big ones I catch?"
yeah, and I mean, hey, sometimes you have the luck of the draw, sometimes you don't. I mean, even with a good guy.
Well,
So
Ryan, when you're catching the big fish, the boat's rocking too much with that weight of the fish that it's hard for me to take the steady. See, so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All right, let's see what else we got. There's another one. There's a look. That might have been the same fish. That wasn't too terrible.
yeah, nice little rainbow.
So far, I think we saw a couple of brown trout in one of those pictures, and then there's other little animals along the way. What all animals we saw? We saw a mink. Remember that?
Yeah,
we-
saw the mink. Saw some
Couple of-
sturgeons mating, which
Oh,
was
yeah.
really
Those are
impressive. I
big
don't think we got any
fish.
pictures of that.
No, I didn't take a picture of that. It was a big fish. I try not to take pictures of big fish. I didn't want everybody to know about the big fish, So,
I
but
think we heard some turkeys back in the woods
Oh,
too
yeah.
that day.
That's right. Yeah.
It might have been turkeys or one turkey calling turkeys. I'm not really sure what it was, but it did sound like it. At one point, it sounded like somebody calling a turkey too. So let's see. And so this is pretty view. And now, David, where all do you go? Because I know you go all over. When you go,
Yes. So I do the Caney Fork and also do the Obi River below Dale Hollow. It's kind of my two middle Tennessee rivers that I do consistently. Mostly the Caney though. Also do the Clinch River, which is near Knoxville. And I do a lot of trips in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Also, I have a commercial use authorization from the Park Service to do trips there. And probably at this stage in my guiding, I have more trips there with my other guides than I do myself. I do a lot of boat trips anymore, but seasonally, I still spend a lot of time in the Smokies as well.
so I bet Smokies is fun. And Ryan, you're talking about some backcountry fishing that you like to do. What's the difference between what we did and then the backcountry?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest difference between just regular wade fishing in back countries, you can just get away from everybody else. And I feel like you can do a lot of that as well with a raft, is just being able to get out there and it doesn't look it, but hike a couple miles into the woods on a Saturday and really just get into some wild trout. I mean, stuff that's wild to Tennessee, not stocked fish. So, from your a fishing perspective, it's a little bit more strategic. It's lighter tackle. It's more of like a stealth type of approach. But it's just, I think it goes back to camaraderie with the people that you're around, and spending the time, spending that time in the woods together. I think that's what it's all about. It's a much different experience than sitting on a 5-gallon bucket and throwing a big old fat worm on a hook into the water waiting for something to bite it.
Yeah, that
I think
was,
that's the biggest thing with fly fishing is it's really kind of that total experience. It's more about where it takes you, the critters you see alongside the river, maybe the hike to get there, sometimes there's certain times of year, maybe the wildflowers along the trail. There's just so much more to it than just catching a fish. And I tell people that all the time, and I always emphasize, but catching fish is important. That's why we're out here. But if I was only interested in catching fish, there's probably other ways to go catch fish without all the effort it takes to go hike 3 miles in to go catch a 6-inch rainbow or something. So it's really just a complete experience in my opinion. I definitely am with you on that, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely.
all right, David, I want to get you to kind of show us around your website here. That looks like Cades Cove.
Yeah, that's actually on Sparks Lane in Cades Cove, the first little shortcut road going
Yeah.
through Cades Cove.
I did when I was in ROTC. We were doing, this is where we got our blue berets. We would earn our blue berets by doing orienteering around Cades Cove.
Oh, that sounds fun.
I run from one end to that 7 mile, or I don't know, 11-mile loop to the other.
Yep.
And then,
I thought you were pointing right across the street. So from one side to the street to the other.
yeah. No, I mean, yeah, pointing. No, from way over here you can't see it to way over there you can't see it. And then,
Yeah.
and I remember, I'll tell you one funny story while I'm thinking about this. So I got to the point where I was the first sergeant of the Air Commandos, a little tactical training squadron for ROTC Air Force. And it was they don't no longer do that anymore, I don't think. But the guy I was running was so much running with. I had to have a guide, not a guide, but a person that was grading the person running. He is so much faster than me, and he is so much. He was just fast guy, right? And so he's packed up, and he's still faster. He's carrying all the equipment and ropes and everything. He's still faster than me, and so I tell him, I say, I know where all the points are. You get there, you yell it if I'm slowing you down, because the timing's part of it, right? And I know where the shortcuts are, so I can see him hit a point, and I can cut him off. I can see where he's running next and cut him off if I have to. Well, so they're having some kind of ceremony at one of the churches in the graveyard, right? I don't think they're burying somebody, but they're having some kind of ceremony, right? And so, and this guy's all dressed, and he's got full camouflage on. His face is all camouflage. He's holding ropes. He's holding a backpack, and he runs through there, and he says, right in the middle of the funeral or whatever is going on. And then he runs off in the woods. And I come out of the other side of the woods, and everybody in that funeral just pointing to where he went. And so that was my experience in Cades Cove. That was fun.
Nice.
But anyway, and this looks like a lot of this is the Smokies, or could be.
Yeah, I'd say the first three are the Smokies. The last picture there is actually from South Carolina, but still Appalachian Mountains, so to speak.
Good deal. And that looks like a good sized fish.
Yeah, so kind of the cool thing in the Smokies is that the fish up there are not big on average. The fish are probably going to average a lot smaller than what we caught on the Caney, like 5 to 9 inches is probably the average fish. But some of the streams hold brown trout, and anytime you get brown trout, there's always that chance for a really big fish because they tend to grow larger. So anytime you find one, it's always a treat.
That's a pretty picture.
Those are the treat right there.
Yeah, so that's our native species. So here in the southern Appalachians, brook trout, which are actually technically a char, um, and the difference between char and trout, just in a nutshell, char have dark bodies with light spots, and trout have light bodies with dark spots. Scientifically, they're a little bit different genetically and everything, but that's kind of in a nutshell the quickest way to figure that out. So they're a neat fish. They're our native species, our only native species. Rainbows and browns were introduced at some point. They've gone wild and do really well in our streams, but those brook trout are just little jewels.
Yeah.
I thought the difference between a regular trout and a char was how much you cooked it. That's my attempt at humor. All right, let's see. So Great Smoky Mountains, Caney Fork, Clinch River, Cherokee, North Carolina, and other rivers and streams. So you basically will go any place anybody wants you to, it sounds like.
Pretty close to it. So like Cherokee, for example, is something that I don't do a whole lot. It's seasonal. I will guide a little bit inside the Great Smoky Mountains, very close to Cherokee. I've had a couple of guides that have run trips for me at different times that will occasionally run trips on the actual Cherokee tribal waters, which is some really neat water. But I'll do some smallmouth bass seasonally, largemouth striped bass, muskie. There's a lot of random stuff that I'll do kind of seasonally and as people want it. But really, first and foremost, I'm a trout guide first. It's kind of my most favorite thing to do as a fly angler.
I think one thing that I was most impressed with, David, is just, your knowledge of some of the rivers that I fish on a regular basis. And, my fishing on a regular basis is a lot different than yours, right? So it's like, I go once a week and, will sometimes kind of like pound my chest, like, oh, I know what I'm doing. And it's always great to kind of get humbled by a guide because there's so much to learn with this sport. And it's more of a skill set and a knowledge base, right? So I definitely appreciate the knowledge that you shared as it pertains to the Hiwassee and even some techniques below the Chickamauga Dam. I mean, there's so much to know about this sport, and I think it's crucial if you're kind of chartering, uncharted waters or waters that you're not familiar with to engage in a guide because the flow schedule, you know what is hitting the fish, what the fish are hitting on, kind of the holes to fish, what to expect. And I mean, I think from an overall user experience perspective or end user perspective rather, I mean, that's crucial to the outcome of any trip.
Yeah,
Right.
something really cool kind of with what you just mentioned about always learning, I always tell people guides don't necessarily always have the answers. That's one thing that's really cool about my job is that I'm always learning. And I tell people, every year I have these kind of leaps forward that happen where I learn something new, kind of cool, and I can always apply it in the future. But that's kind of the thing I love about this job is just the teaching component, just getting to help people learn. I'm a high school math teacher originally by trade and kind of carry that teaching mindset into what I do now.
Well, you do it well, and you're very uplifting too. So if anybody wanted to get lessons in a humble way, you're very good at that. You make everybody feel like they're learning at a good rate and just make it easy. Walk us. Is there anything else on this website you'd like for us to see? Is there something? I know that we're going to look at the rates in a second, and then you can talk about how to get a hold of you. And
That tab that you're on right now, if you just want to look at our fly fishing guides
Okay.
page real quick, that's just kind of the other guides that help me with trips. Some of them pretty much as close to full time as I can book them, but they all kind of book other ways as well. But
yeah,
they're all really good dudes, and they all all have kind of their own specialties. And one thing that I kind of tell people is like, I always really appreciate the people that come back and fish with me again and again. I have people that fish with me once a year. I've got people that fish with me sometimes many times a year. And I appreciate those people because it's kind of cool, basically taking your friends fishing is what it turns into as time goes on. But at the same time, kind of back with what Ryan was saying, you're wanting to learn something new, go find a guide. Kind of the same deal though, is if you're wanting to see a new angle on something, go with a different guy on the same water. Because sometimes, what one of my guys, say Elam or Pat or somebody might teach you is going to be entirely different than the way I might approach it. And it's not that one approach is right and the rest of them are wrong, but they all have merit at different times. So that's just one thing I try to emphasize to people is, as much as we appreciate it when you lock in and always go with us, it's okay to try the guides, even outside of my guide service. I've got guides that I recommend to other people like, hey, we're booked, but try this guy. He's excellent. You'll learn a ton. Great guy to spend a day with. And there's just always something new that you can learn with somebody different.
That's a big fish.
Yeah, so that's a muskie. So that's one of the things that we will seasonally target. It's called the fish of 10,000 casts. So it's not an easy fish to catch, but they're fun to try to catch.
Yeah, that would have made Ryan's day right there, I think.
Oh, it certainly would have. Yeah. Even that brown above. I mean, that's a great size brown trout right there.
Yeah.
And so this guy's name is what?
With the muskie is Elam.
Okay.
And Pat runs pretty much as many trips as I can give him. He is a full-time fly fishing guide and generally prefers to book his trips with me first and foremost as much as he can, but he will run trips for other people as well from time to time. Travis, that first guy there other than myself, he's actually not really guiding anymore. I still kind of claim him. He was the first guy that I got other than myself when I was started my business and kind of guided a few years and was like, man, I got too many trips. I need some help. So Travis came on. He was a longtime guide before working for me. And he got a really cool deal. He actually runs the Gatlinburg trout facility now. So if you ever just want to go catch a ton of big fish in the middle of Gatlinburg, he's the guy that takes care of that water there. So
Nice.
That's Travis. So yeah, that'd be cool. What are these archives over here?
yeah, so I used to keep a blog on this website that was kind of fishing reports and stuff like that. And that's just kind of going back to that time period. I think mostly I have everything redirected to my other blog now, but I still have some of those archives that you can kind of see old fishing reports and stuff. There's a few pages on here that aren't even built out at this point.
Yeah, that's every website, right?
So this is my longtime blog. This is the one that I've been doing for many years, and it basically just started out as a way for me to kind of keep track of my fishing experiences. And if somebody enjoyed reading about it, great, kind of a deal. And really kind of took on a life of its own. I don't blog nearly as much as I used to. I'm pretty happy if I get a few out a year at this point. But it's just something to do. I enjoy writing. I'm not necessarily a good writer. I'm more just kind of sharing my experience, but I enjoy doing it. It helps me to relive the experience most importantly, because like I said, to me, it's more about that experience than just the fact that I caught a fish.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So got that. I want to go back. All right. So, and then here's the rates. I want everybody to see how they can. So these rates, there's another guy. Is that one of your customers?
Yep. He caught a big old brown trout on the Caney. He's fished with me a bunch of times over the years, and he was tickled pink to catch that big old fish finally.
Yeah. So you have your rate page here if anybody wants to look at it later, but they all look very reasonable to me.
No, they're actually a little low, quite honestly. I tend to fish. I fished with several guides over the past few years in different areas of the Southeast, and yeah, I mean the rates are kind of low from what I've personally seen. So just one thing to consider as you move forward with this.
Yeah, and I think I'm on the same page with Ryan. I'm thinking that as busy as you stay, because you can't find any time or a lot of time with you, I would start raising those rates because I think you're
And we've actually been pretty aggressive raising them over the last few years, and we've had to kind of
back
be
off.
a little bit cautious over the last 12 months or so, just with everything happening. We don't want to be that person that's still just going crazy with our rates like everyone else is with everything in our economy right now. So it's kind of on hold right now. They probably are going to go up again within the next year or two, but right now they've kind of hit a plateau for the time being.
So you need to get out there and book with David now because these are very reasonable rates. All right, the one last thing that so now I'm the new guy, and Ryan kept saying, "Oh, he's hooked now. He's hooked now." So I think I was hooked more than the fish were hooked, right? And then we got almost 50 of them, or somewhere around 50 of them. So give me. So let's say, what's the first thing that somebody like me needs if they're gonna? What's the one thing they need if they don't have anything else?
I'm sure Ryan has an idea on this as well. The first thing I'm going to tell you though is you really just need to get a rod and a reel and a line. Then that's kind of obvious just because you can't fish without it. But I think the main reason I say that is the first piece of advice that I give anybody that's getting into fly fishing is to just cast. And when I say cast, I don't mean go fishing. There's a difference between casting and fishing. Because if you're out there fishing, you're not worried about technique. You're just worried about, am I getting the tug on the end of my line? But I mean, actually casting. You can do that on a lawn. It's a little bit hard on your fly line. If you've got the money to just burn through fly lines, though, lawn casting is a great way to do it because you're really just not even thinking about fish. If you don't have the money to just buy a new line every 6 months or something, I'd say go cast on a pond or a lake or something, but don't tie a fly on, just cast. Because as a guide, I see this more than anything, but even before I started guiding, I'd see this. The thing that separates really, really good anglers from mediocre anglers, and this is within the realm of people that actually, have been fishing for a long time. Maybe they only can afford to go once or twice a year as far as just the time commitment. So maybe they don't get a lot of practice, but the thing that makes the difference between those anglers is just their casting ability. Are they able to make those casts or not? So that's kind of the first piece of advice I give people is just cast as much as you can.
Yeah, and I guess David, more specific to that though, I mean, there's so many different options out there, there's so many different techniques, but I think overall, like a 9 foot rod, 5 weight with the line forward, with the weight forward on that line is going to be kind of like your standard
Yep.
run of the mill. Will get you set up for just about any situation.
Yeah, that's a really good starter setup for trout, and will do most any trout fishing you want to. And you can even do some light bass. I've caught some smallmouth. I've caught all sorts of stuff on a 9 foot 5 weight, even below Chickamauga. We were talking about Chickamauga earlier. I've fished a 9 foot 5 weight down there and caught all kinds of bass and stuff. So
And so all right, so we got the rod, we got the reel, we got the line, we're casting well enough. We got the 9 foot 5 weight, weight forward. Weight forward doesn't mean anything to me. What does that mean, Ryan?
Yeah, so on the line itself, there's a lot of, you can get really granular and start to really split hairs more than what I can even describe. But essentially, a weight forward line is just kind of like your standard run of the mill fly line. And essentially, I think the way that I've always thought of it as is, if you're spin reel fishing, you're casting the lure, right? And if you're fly fishing, you're letting the rod do the work and you're casting the line. And then the line kind of places the fly where you're looking for it to go. And typically it's going to be in some sort of current where that fly is going to naturally drift over uh wherever the fish is feeding to entice the fish to bite. So that weight forward really lets you, during your cast, really lets you kind of direct that line in the proper direction. And David can probably speak in a lot more depth to this than I can.
yeah, so the weight forward designation, has a lot to do with where the weight is placed in the fly line. If you look at an actual taper of the line, the what we call the head of the line, that front 30 feet or so, is fatter than the rest of the line. And that just kind of, that extra mass there helps the rod do its job basically. You can get a double taper line. It's basically thick through the whole line. And that'll work okay. The weight forward line is designed more for getting distance on your cast. So if you're going to be fishing somewhere like the Caney Fork, where maybe eventually you might want to make a 50 or 60-foot cast, that weight forward is probably a better choice to accomplish that than like a double taper would be.
Good. All right. So now we got the line, and I guess the lures are the next most important thing, right? So what would I be looking for if I wanted to do a variety of fish?
Man, that's like the $1 million question. You could ask 100 fly anglers that question and get 100 different answers on that. Everyone has their favorite fly. Um, for me on the Caney Fork, there's a variety of flies that I think work really well. One fly that year round is going to catch fish on the Caney Fork is a zebra midge. And a midge is just a little small bug. I kind of describe it to people as a non-biting mosquito. That's basically what a midge is. And that's one of the main food sources on the Caney. So anytime you can imitate one of those, you're doing pretty well. And those will catch fish pretty much. Yeah, I mean, pretty much any day of the year on the Caney, you can probably catch a fish on a zebra midge.
But it's
Fair enough.
it's more than the fly though, right? A lot of it comes down to the depth and the presentation of that fly, right? So making sure that you've got a good drift going at the right depth and making it so irresistible where it's not a perfect match as to what might be out in the wilderness, but it's tempting enough and it's essentially floating by the trout's nose
Mhm.
where they're gonna bite on it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then you had some kind of little floater, some kind of indicator. What's that called?
Yeah, strike
Not called the
indicator.
bobber.
Yeah, I
So,
didn't call it.
fly fishermen, we don't use bobbers, even though some of the ones that we use look an awfully suspiciously like a bobber. We use strike indicators because it indicates when the fish has struck our fly.
Striking indicators.
And there's all kinds of people with all kinds of standards, and there's people that won't even use strike indicators. They're too pure for doing that, and that's fine. Some people will only fish with dry flies, which is a fly that sits on the surface. There's just all kinds of different ideas about how it should be done and what is ideal. So as a guide, a strike indicator, and some sort of a little beadhead nymph or a midge under that indicator, that's just a really quick way for me to get people in fish most of the time on any trout river. But there's lots of other ways to do it.
Now I need some kind of fishing tackle box of some kind. What would we call that?
Man, there's so many options. That really comes down to personal preference. So I'm going to be
Yeah.
curious to hear what Ryan uses personally when he's out fishing. I know I personally, when I'm wade fishing, um, I use a waist pack, which sounds way cooler than fanny pack. So I like a waist pack. That's just me. I actually started out fly fishing with a vest, which is kind of that classic option. And I did that for, man, I can't even tell you how long, a long, long time. Um, and eventually, thing with any fly fishing pack, and like in the boat, I use a boat bag. Real, cool sounding name, the boat bag. But um, as you probably saw in my boat bag, like if there was space in there, it was full of something. And that's kind of what I got to with a fly fishing vest is if there's 30 pockets in that vest, I'm going to have, 35 pockets worth of junk stuffed into those 30 pockets. And the vest weighs 20 pounds and it's pulling on my shoulders and pulling
Yeah.
on my neck. And it's just too much. So I eventually went to the waist pack to eliminate some of that strain on my back and my neck. So Ryan, what do you like to use?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I used to have the waist pack, but then it would
Yeah,
pull down my pants on beneath my waders.
yeah.
And then I realized I didn't have the proper storage that I was looking for. So I currently use it's essentially a backpack that has two straps in the front that has a bunch of pockets like a vest. So to answer your initial question as far as like what's the best, like to hold all your tackle is, I guess number one, I always have way more crap than what I need, right? So that's number one. Number two, it's like I have really fat fingers, right? So it's like I like a lot of the fly carriers that have magnetic placement on it, right? So like I can have a whole section of really small nymphs and really small flies that are just magnetically stick to the inside of that case. But I mean, it's more about preference. I mean, my buddy that I go on a regular basis with, he wears a chest pack, and it's like it's all right here. But one of the disadvantages is he can't see where he's walking, like when we're going through the woods, right? So it's really about preference, but I think more so than anything, it's more about comfort. And I think it's one of those things where you really have to step back and realize like what flies am I actually going to use today, right? And a lot of that comes down to, am I fishing for wild fish or am I going to be on a river? Am I hiking in 3 miles or am I standing in a raft all day? And I think, and I think that starts to kind of dictate which direction that you're going to go. For a variety of different reasons. But I mean, I have flies that are massive streamers that require their own box. And I know that if I'm going to go for fishing for wild trout, I leave that at home, and I think the name of the game really is to show up to go fishing with the least amount of crap as possible, because just like any other hobby that's out there, you can easily show up with 3 or 4 different rods, every single fly pattern on the earth, every single type of leader that's out there, and never touch 90% of what you're bringing.
Well, I noticed we had just one, I guess it might have been the zebra midge or something like it. And that's what I used the whole day, right? What was that you had on my rod?
I think we were using a big nymph, maybe a pheasant tail nymph.
But
With
it's
a big
fairly
beak.
small. It's tiny.
I can't remember if it was that or might have been a midge. It might have had a Bart's bug. I have a little fly that I've kind of designed that I call a Bart's bug. It may have been that. I don't remember which one we were fishing that day because I've been fishing 2 or 3 things lately.
Yeah,
What
it was
about
probably like a pheasant tail, maybe like a size 14 or 16, which kind of, Craig, to your point, is small, but it's big in the world of
trout?
bugs
Yeah, and
and
fly
bugs that
fishing.
are under the surface of the water. So
Perfect.
a lot of the times, like if you're not catching any fish, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, but like you want to go smaller, you want to go as small as possible, and then it comes to the point where it's like I can't see the hole where I have to put the leader through or the tippet through to tie the fly in, because everything is just, it's so micro.
Yep.
So I've seen people with the hats and the fly. Is that old timey? Is that what they used to do in the 30s when I had when my rod? I think my rod probably came with one of those hats. But anyway, story. All right, so now I got all this stuff. I'm doing good. And then I noticed that a lot of what that Cane Fork River is a cold river. You go in the middle of the summer and it feels like you're getting your feet are icy. So it's a cold river, especially I guess when they're flowing water through it. So what do you recommend as far as I guess before anybody ever got a boat, they'd get waders or they'd do it without waders, right? What would you recommend on someone that had a little bit of money to spend but don't want to spend too much?
That's a little bit tricky. It kind of depends on your cold tolerance. Like I see people out there in just shorts and sandals waiting. Every couple years, I forget how bad it is, and I try doing that for a couple hours, and 45 minutes in, and my toes are completely numb, and I
Yeah.
remember why I don't do that.
Yeah.
So I usually use waders. I use stocking foot waders with boots that go over the wader. The main reason, you can buy boot foot waders, but I like the stocking foot because kind of like what Ryan was talking about, if you're hiking in for wild fish, you don't need those full waders. You're going to be just using the wading boots by themselves, wet wading probably in the summer. So I like having the option of taking my boots and using them separately from the waders when I choose to, or maybe with different kinds of waders. Maybe one day I'll use, wading pants, and another day I might use full chest waders. So I just like the kind of versatility of doing it with the stocking foot waders and separate boots.
All right, is there anything I left? I know that the rain gear came in handy that you had. So something that keeps you dry in the rain, because rain was a great time to be there. So
Some of
maybe
the best
rain,
fishing is in the rain. Um, really any trout fishing I can think of, there's often the best fishing is going to be in the rain. I'm sure there's a point of diminishing returns if you're in the middle of a hurricane or something, um but rain's a good time to be out there more often than not. So some good rain gear is definitely helpful. Sometimes in the middle of the summer, if it's a 95-degree day and all of a sudden like a thunderstorm comes up, there's days that I just kind of strategically decide, I don't think I'm wearing a raincoat because it's really hot out here and I just would
yeah.
feel a whole lot better getting some moisture on myself. But at the same time, it's like, okay, I'm okay riding home soaking wet when I make that choice. So I think one thing that we kind of glossed over that I should mention when we were talking about gear is at the end of our fly line, we have the leader. You
Okay.
need a leader. And there's so many different sizes. We kind of match leader size to fly size to a large extent. So that's probably a little beyond the scope of what we're talking about right now. And then tippet material, usually you want a couple, three spools of different sizes and types of tippet. And that's kind of the fine
I don't know
diameter
what that is.
at the end of your leader.
Uh-huh.
Um, and when you've cut your leader back, a couple feet, you can take some of that material off your spool and tie some fresh tippet material onto the leader and basically extend the life of that leader. You can go through 100 leaders and just keep buying leaders and using them until the tippet's gone if you want to, but that becomes wasteful when you could just tie some fresh tippet on the end of it.
Very good. So that's good. So, and it
And I
says,
guess one thing to think about there is like, you think about the diameter of like just standard fishing line, and then you kind of compare that to the diameter of a piece of your hair, right? And it's just like it's tremendously a lot thinner. But I think ultimately, David, it allows a few different things. It allows the presentation of that fly to be more natural. And then based on what you're fishing and what technique, it could actually allow your fly to sink faster without the drag of the current of the water, right? So, this is there, I think what I've learned over the time with fly fishing, and I've been doing it for a long time, but really I've only gotten back into it pretty heavy, not as often as David, but there's a lot of different dimensions of fly fishing. So you can start off very basic, and very quickly you can get into, you can start spending some money on gear and techniques and rods and leaders and tip. Like you can make it as complex as you want it to be, to the point where you become a guide and you're tying your own flies and kind of going about it that way.
and I think one thing we left out was a net, because I guess if you had um, a rod and some line, don't want to break the line, I guess. So you'll probably require a net. I think
Yeah,
I'm correct.
net, I would say of all the things that we could talk about is probably the most optional. Um, the biggest reason that I consistently use nets is it's a really good, it kind of goes back to that ethical piece. I choose to do catch and release. That's just me personally. And ethically, if I'm going to release the fish, then I need to release them in as good a shape as I can. So using a net, if I want a picture of the fish, basically enables me to kind of corral that fish and keep it wet, keep it in the water, so that when we're ready to get the picture, we have that fish out of the water for maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, and then it's right back in the water. Whereas if I don't have the net and I want a picture, I've got to drag that fish up on the shore, or drag it in the boat and let it flop around for a minute or two and get my camera ready. And by the time I've done all that, that fish is toast. That fish isn't going to swim off. And if he does swim off, he's not going to make it very long. So, the net for me is more about just keeping the fish healthy while we get ready for a picture. And it also depends on the size of the fish. If you're chasing really big fish, it's more helpful than if you're chasing really little fish. The only reason I carry a net in the Smokies is just for that picture component. Just, hey, let's corral this fish long enough so you can get a picture of this fish if you want one.
And I noticed,
Otherwise, there's really no reason if this fish are small.
kind of go along with what you just said. I noticed that the net you have looks like a fish friendly net. It didn't have a lot of cordage in it, had smooth plastic.
Yeah, so it's a rubber bag, and it's definitely a little easier on the fish. Some of the knotted nets are definitely harder on the fish's bodies. It can pull, brush scales off of them and stuff if it's a real hard material. So it's definitely a fish friendly material.
All right. So now I got so excited about it and everything. Now I want to get something I can float in. Am I ready for that now? It's been a couple of years. I've done a couple of things, and so now I'm kind of like Ryan. Ryan's got a lot more experience I have at this point, but Ryan's got a
So Ryan's actually got a pretty good idea going. Ryan, what boat are you getting?
Oh man, I'm waiting to get confirmation on when it gets delivered, but I've always wanted a drift boat, which traditionally is like a hard hull type of boat, like the one that you saw David has earlier. But I'm not experienced in rowing in any capacity, so I ended up going with a rubber raft that has a welded aluminum frame and kind of hard body that sits in the raft, with the idea of it's nearly impossible to sink, impossible to kind of flip, and you kind of bounce off of rocks versus crashing into them with a drift boat. So it's definitely I went with the raft as a as an easier solution to kind of get my feet wet as it pertains to rowing, but also give me some versatility as far as what rivers I choose to fish in, especially if I fish in a river that I'm not familiar with.
so I
That
have two.
boat
Go ahead. Go
I was
ahead,
gonna
Dave.
say that boat question can kind of comes down to kind of like your fly fishing pack. It's really kind of a personal preference, and also what kind of water are you going to want to fish in? Because I have a neat little, I guess you could call it a boat, but calling it a boat's probably pretty generous, but it's called a float tube. It's basically a little personal pontoon with a seat across the middle that you sit in and use kick fins like you would use for scuba or something to propel yourself around, and you're not going to use that in moving water, or at least you shouldn't. It's more for ponds and lakes and things like that. But you can use something as small as that. You can use a canoe. I've fly fished out of canoes. You can use a john boat. You can use a bass boat. You can use a drift boat. There's so many different boats, but every boat, I just look at a boat as a tool. And so the tool should be matched for the job that you most want to do. So you need to figure out, where am I going to be fishing? What boat is best? And if you're going to get a boat like one that Ryan's getting, or like my drift boat, you really want to make sure that to your list of things to get into fly fishing, that you add a buddy that's willing to get into it with you. Because if you don't have a buddy that's willing to learn to row with you, then you're going to become a glorified guide and you're going to row all your friends around. But if they're not helping row you around, you're never going to get to fish. So that's kind of one of the cool things when Ryan was telling me about this raft that he has. He's like, yeah, man, like I've got a good fishing buddy and he's willing to learn to row with me and to do some rowing. And it's like, man, that's a perfect setup. I get people all the time like, oh yeah, I want to get a drift boat. I'm like, well, do you have somebody that's going to help you row? Well, no, not really. It's like, all you're going to do is be rowing. You're not going to be fishing if you don't have somebody to help. So, there's boats you can get that have a trolling motor that you can remotely operate with, a little remote control or something, or a foot pedal. There's all kinds of things that you can do with a boat, but it needs to fit your situation in the water that you want to fish.
So you just brought up another. Now I got two sea kayaks, and they're size of a large 14-foot
Yeah,
canoe, but
right.
you sit in them. I don't know how easy that would be to put all the stuff there, because they're basically, you get into them and there's straps on the top of it where you
Right.
can strap things down. But
There's things that you could do with one of those, but I think the limitation of one of those is maneuverability. Like those are designed for speed and covering water, and not as much about turning, making a lot of tight turns or maneuvering, which you're going to need to be able to do on a lot of the water around here, you know. So
Yeah,
kayak's not a bad idea, just as getting the right kayak for the job, I would say.
yeah, mine's a traveling kayak, like you said, but it's cool because you can
Yeah.
travel fast in it.
Oh yeah.
Um, but I think it's pretty maneuverable too.
Okay.
It's just that it might get you to a place where you can wade,
Yeah.
that kind of
And
thing.
sometimes that's the best kind of boat, you know, in a river like the Caney Fork, there's a bunch of public wade access points that are on really good water, but there's also a lot of really good water that's not at a public access point. And sometimes you just need a boat to access that water so you can wade where everyone else isn't wading, you know? So sometimes just a canoe or a kayak just to get you to those places is a great idea.
Yeah. And then one of the things you guys mentioned, but probably not on your list, but I heard it, a fishing buddy. And this may be a good, there's probably all kinds of more things we can say, but this might be a good place to stop. So if somebody had a fishing buddy and they want to go fishing, then David, you're the guy, and they go to your website and they can, and the trips are real reasonable. You can get two people in your float in your boat, right? But you also do waiting, I
Yeah.
noticed on your website. So
Yeah.
you can have usually two people's it because you're paying attention to
We
them.
we usually keep a 2-to-1 ratio on things like that. We very rarely will make exceptions and go up to 3 anglers with a guide. Um, and there's kind of a safety component there because a lot of our wade trips are in the Smokies where the streams are slippery, and we want to make sure people are safe. But also just to make sure people are getting the experience that they think they're getting, because a lot of the best learning happens when the guide's standing right behind your shoulder, or right, in front of you in the boat or behind you in the boat.
Yeah.
And
100%. Yeah.
if your buddy's over there and your other buddy's over there and you're way over here and the guy's racing in circles trying to get to each one of you, none of you get a ton of attention, so um generally just two anglers per guide, with occasional exceptions to that. But we can also, with multiple guides, um we can usually accommodate bigger groups as well sometimes. So
And that's very good. And what's the youngest that if somebody has their son or daughter they want to take, what would be the youngest of your
I,
group?
so there's my recommendation, and there's what we've actually done in practice, and I've had kids as young as 6 that we've had out fishing. um in actual, like, best practice, my recommendation would be don't start kids before they're 10 or 12. That's kind of where their coordination and physical abilities get to where they actually will have a good time. Because if you start them too soon and they don't have a good time, then they're not going to enjoy it. And you want them to start out
And
enjoying
you
it. You
won't
don't want
enjoy it
them.
either.
Yeah, like, it's going to be miserable for everybody. And if your whole point is to get them hooked and get them started in fly fishing, like, you want them to have a great first experience, or early experience. So
So Ryan, what kind of fishing buddy would you take on another trip? What that would help you with your business, and you could get to know them, and you could build a relationship, and you could sell your services. What kind of person would you?
Yeah, well, I mean, well, that's easy because I mean, and that's really the conduit of why when I take people out from a business perspective, I leverage a company, and a guide like David, because I'm not that great of a teacher, right? I mean, I'm still learning. I feel like I know what I'm doing from a week to week basis, but being able to leverage a guide and to be able to bring somebody out with no experience and then let them leave with the basics and a few fish under their belt, and that camaraderie and that the conversations that happen along the float, to kind of open up the dialogue for future conversations. I mean, that's essentially what I'm after selfishly from a business perspective. From an experience perspective, because of the guide, it allows for a great time, a new experience, and new memories. And your decision, and you specifically in this case, to determine whether or not fly fishing is something that you want to take up moving forward. But I think a guide has been instrumental to what I'm trying to do from a relationship starting point as I reach out to professionals in various capacities and start that foundation to build relationships. I'm essentially looking constantly for like fishing buddies, right? So I mean that's what I'm after personally.
Yep.
Kind
That's
of
very
going
good.
back to, you know, finding fishing buddies is like one thing I always recommend to people if you're just getting into fly fishing is go find out if you have a local Trout Unlimited group. Trout Unlimited
Absolutely.
is a fly fishing conservation organization, and I know in Nashville they have the Music City chapter. Bunch of great people doing really good work in the local area, and Trout Unlimited, advocates for clean, cold water, advocates for trout, but they also just do a lot of really neat local programs. One of the things I love that they do, a lot of chapters do, is called Trout in the Classroom. They basically purchase these large aquariums with complete water circulation systems that keeps the water cold, and they bring fish eggs and put in there, and the kids basically get to see these eggs go all the way from being eggs to hatching to growing, and then eventually they get to go and help release those fish on a river somewhere. I actually saw recently Music City TU did a release below Center Hill Dam on the Caney Fork, like right where we fished, so it's just cool because they're getting the next generation in. Like a lot of times, hunting, fishing, all these things that are important to us are seen as like old guys sports. And if we don't be getting the new generations involved, getting kids involved and interested, then like eventually this stuff's going to fall by the wayside, and we're not going to have people advocating for these wild places that we love. So it's so important, some of that work that they're doing, getting kids interested.
Yeah.
So
And that's a good point because, if you never been there and never knew about it, you don't even know when it disappears. Right. And so you're totally out of touch. And the people who are in touch are the ones that care about it most. And they may be fishing and hunting, but without, um, I know there's more deer in the United States than there ever has been. And probably more bear and more everything else.
mhm.
But let's see. I think that I had another thought, but I think leaving it with the buddy system, that's pretty good. And so now if somebody out there wants to go with David, that would be really good. So if you want to find David, you can find a buddy. If not, I know Ryan and I would go with you. so so but we had a really good time. So David, I really appreciate you spending the time and just explaining a little bit about what you're doing and getting me set up so I know what I need to do. And Ryan, without you, I would not have experienced this. So this is a really nice thing to do for people. And it's a really good thing. Help me to see something I may not have seen. And I've always passed over the Caney Fork River, but have never been up and down that part of the Caney Fork River. So it was really good. So I'm gonna leave on that note. If you guys want to say one last thing, then you're welcome to. If not, then we're good.
Thanks for having me. It was great chatting with you guys, and it was really cool meeting both of you guys and sharing the river with you guys. It's always kind of a highlight of my job, getting to meet different people from all walks of life. So great time.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it well. Appreciate it and looking forward to the next trip.
All right. Thank you guys. And